Welcome. This is the week ahead. We're looking at the second week of June. This is because we're going to be exploring some of the key ideas and key items that is going to be taking place over the next 1 week. On my right, as you can see, some of the key items that we've discussed in the past week, including that of the GST possible reintroduction, the subsidy of the chicken being removed. All this is actually quite interesting, largely because the government is looking at better ways to improve on the collection of money and expenditure of money. So for the next 30 minutes or so, we're going to be talking about some of the key ideas that is going to be explored over the next week. Now, we start off with the most important item of the week because starting 1st July, the government will no longer provide subsidy assistance to poultry farmers. The subsidy bill of about 720 million ringgit will be scrapped, and instead, assistance will come in the form of direct cash assistance to the B40 community. Prime Minister Datuk Seri Ismail Sabri Yaakob said last week that the assistance will be able to help with the daily expenditures of the B40, including purchases of daily items, such that is included of poultry purchases. Now, this will also impact the ceiling price of poultry, which the government assures will still be maintained. Here is the Prime Minister making the announcement.
Walau bagaimanapun, ramai di kalangan penternak tidak menuntut bayaran subsidi yang dikeluarkan. Berbagai isu dibangkitkan. Oleh itu, mulai 1 Julai nanti. Melalui 1 Julai nanti, kita tidak lagi akan memberikan subsidi kepada penternak, tetapi jumlah yang kita berikan subsidi tersebut, kita akan beri direct kepada rakyat yang kita anggap sebagai yang memerlukan. Tujuannya adalah untuk memastikan bebanan kenaikan harga itu tidak terlalu dirasai kerana adanya sumbangan kewangan tunai oleh kerajaan. Bagaimanapun, Menteri KPDN HEP serta Menteri Pertanian akan mengumumkan secara detail perkara ini.
So as you can see, the subsidy was provided, but the argument here is that not many people took up the offer. We don't know how much was taken up or how much wasn't taken up in inverse correlation. So because of that, we're looking for better details or more details when it comes to this item. Now, meanwhile, the Malaysia Competition Commission, or MyCC, is in the final stages of completing its investigation into the alleged existence of a cartel that controls the price and production of chicken supplies in the country. The Deputy Domestic Trade and Consumer Affairs Minister, Datuk Rasul Wahid, said several witnesses among breeders were also called to assist in this said investigation. He said a full report is expected to be tabled this month, and of course the MyCC had set up a special team in early February to investigate allegations of anti-competitive conduct. Now, this includes the abuse of dominant positions in the market that could cause an increase in the prices of goods. We're hoping to see that the result of this is going to come up this month, as per the statement given by Datuk Rasul, the Deputy Minister, but we have no clear idea of how or when the report is going to be tabled. Maybe it could come up as early as next week. Of course, Malaysia's ban on chicken exports began last week on June 1st in an effort to deal with the shortages and high demand. The government has yet to say how long the ban of export on the 3.6 million chickens will last, but officials do expect that supply and prices to normalize within a month.
The move is felt most in Singapore, which sources a third of its chicken from Malaysia, affecting smaller local poultry farmers who supply to the island nation. Singapore consumers have been rushing to stock up on fresh chicken ahead of the ban, with local media reporting that shelves in some wet markets and supermarkets have been cleared of poultry. Chicken rice sellers in Singapore also said they're forced to hike prices. Some are preparing to sell frozen chicken once their fresh chicken supplies are exhausted, while others may cease operations for a while. Nearly all of Singapore's chicken is imported, 34% from Malaysia, 49% from Brazil, and 12% from the US.
Now, last week, I spoke with Dr. Jeffrey Williams of the Malaysia University of Science and Technology. While this is not so much because of the chicken subsidy, this has been talking about the fuel subsidy. Two types of subsidies, very different, but it's still subsidy nonetheless. The government has been talking about targeted fuel subsidy for a long time now, and this is to replace the blanket subsidy approach that we're all enjoying, particularly the RON95 users, folks like me, perhaps like you as well. But there isn't a proper mechanism in place to ensure successful implementation. Now, Professor Jeffrey Williams, the economist from MUSC, suggested a tier pricing system instead. Here's why.
It's really about how much petrol you buy. And the people in the T20 get more of the subsidy because they buy more petrol. So if you're buying a big chunk of petrol, you're pretty sure to be in the T20, right? And if you're buying a small amount, 5 ringgit for your moped, you're pretty sure to be in the B40. So if you had tiered pricing where, let's say, below 10 liters, you pay the subsidized price, above 10 liters to 20, let's say 20, 30 liters, you pay an intermediate price, and then above, let's say 40 or 50 liters, you pay the full price. You're really getting people with big cars and big SUVs and big tanks who put 100 ringgit a time. These guys would actually, these are the rich guys, right? So these guys would actually pay the full price.
According to Jeffrey, the tier pricing mechanism would lessen the total subsidies paid by the government while ensuring those in the B40 group receive the help they need.
The total bill that the government would be paying for subsidies would start to fall because at the moment, the government is paying, the estimate for the fuel subsidies is about 28, perhaps 30 billion. It's a huge amount of money. And this is one of the big concerns, right? People are saying we don't want to paying this big chunk of money. Although you have to remember that Petronas announced 23 billion in profit only yesterday for the first quarter. So the government is getting revenue as well. But better to use this money on something else, social welfare, rather than using it on petrol. Although having said that, if the government doesn't use the money for subsidies, then you and I have to pay it. Anyone using petrol has to pay it. So it is really just a transfer issue. But what they want to do is to reduce the total amount of the subsidy. Now, they would be reducing the total amount because a big chunk of the petrol sales would be at full price. And these would be paid by the richer people, the people buying larger quantities.
Now, from the topic of spending, we take a look at the topic of collection. This is because the goods and services tax might possibly be reintroduced in the near future. Chief Economist of Bank Islam, Dr. Muhammad Afzanizam Abdul Rashid, said that the government needs time to re-evaluate and of the reintroduction of the GST and must take into account multifactorial factors. This is Dr. Afzanizam on the issue.
Kerajaan nak laksanakan GST, dia akan berlaku serta-merta. Saya percaya dia akan mengambil masa mungkin lebih pada setahun kerana perlu melakukan pelbagai kajian dan sebagainya. Dan sudah pasti mungkin dalam tempoh masa itu mungkin situasi berkaitan dengan inflasi ini juga berbeza. Mungkin insya-Allah akan keadaan lebih baik dan sebagainya. Jadi saya rasa pelaksanaan GST ini akan berlaku bukan dalam keadaan yang tiba-tiba. Dia akan memakan masa dan perlu ada sesi libat urus yang ini seharusnya dapat mengurangkanlah kegusaran di kalangan masyarakat.
It's worth noting that the GST was introduced by the administration of Datuk Seri Najib Tun Razak. Now, when the Pakatan Harapan took over, a big pledge of the Pakatan Harapan campaign back in the GE14 election was that they're going to remove the GST. In its place was the SST, and since then we've seen how the government is actually struggling to collect in terms of revenue from consumption tax, actually, because as we all know, the GST system is a little bit more superior, perhaps even far more superior than the SST. Over the past few years, we're seeing how the government has tried to socialize the notion of GST being reintroduced back to the market, particularly that the administration of Ismail Sabri is of the same party of that of Datuk Seri Najib Tun Razak. Introducing GST is never going to be a good thing for the government of the day when it comes to political survivability, but at the same time, it is actually quite important for us to appreciate the fact that this is the only way forward when it comes to greater collection of revenue, when it comes to consumption of goods and services. We don't know how the government is going to reintroduce this. We also don't know what the impact is when it comes to the businesses that is going to be impacted by the GST. We don't know the timeline of the GST. In fact, we don't know much about the reintroduction of the GST, even if it's going to be reintroduced. Much of the argument is also stemmed on the fact that no government in the world has actually survived the polls after the introduction of a GST around the world. This statement was given by an interview that I did with LHDN, or the Inland Revenue Board, some years ago, and Datuk Sri Najib Tun Razak's government was just yet another casualty of a government falling at the polls after the introduction of the GST. Perhaps one way to speculate this is on the introduction or reintroduction of the GST by Ismail Sabri Yaakob after the GE15, of which we don't know when. We can speculate that it's the end of the year. We can even speculate it can happen tomorrow, quite frankly. Whatever it is, the GE15 must happen by March next year, 2023. So perhaps the GST could be introduced then. All this is, of course, conjecture. Moving ahead, we're trying to understand how the GST is going to impact several sectors. One such sector, of course, is going to be tourism. And now that we know that the Minister of Tourism, Arts and Culture, Datuk Sri Nancy Shukri, said that there wouldn't be a major disruption to the hospitality and tourism sector if and when the GST is being introduced. Nancy says that the implementation and mechanism will be evaluated further, and trying to understand this even further, we want to take a look into what she actually said following this particular news or possible news that the GST might be reintroduced. This is Datuk Sri Nancy Shukri, the Minister of Tourism.
Actually, it's good for our economy. Yes. Sebab itu kita nanggar sebelum GST dihapuskan kan, tangga what happened to economy di seluruh Malaysia. Kita mahu semuanya mengambil peluang untuk menunjukkan apa kekuatan ada dalam negara kita melalui makanan dan juga warisan kita, seni dan budaya. Dari segi makanan kita ada warisan juga. Jadi sebabnya kita sebagai kementerian yang bertanggungjawab dalam urusan warisan seni dan budaya dan juga pelancongan, sebab bila pelancongannya meliputi semua tu.
So from collection, GST, which is the big issue of the day, we're going to get more details perhaps next week, to expenditure, which is on subsidy. Also, we are expected to listen to more information coming in from the government when it comes to how they're going to spend the subsidy in a more targeted fashion. We have a big issue on our shoulders right now that we are going to wait for further instructions and further clarity from the government next week. Now, changing tack, we're moving towards the education sector. This is because the Education Ministry has decided to do away with the Form 3 assessment or the PT3 examination for good starting this year. The PT3 exam was not held for the past 2 years because of the pandemic. The question now is, does the PT3 reduction or removal going to impact our 15-year-olds nationwide? This is the Minister talking about the issue.
Senior Minister Datuk Dr. Razzie Jiden said his ministry will instead work on strengthening school-based and classroom-based assessments.
Sewaktu sebelum pandemik, PT3 telah dilaksanakan di sekolah, di mana guru-guru menjana soalan-soalan untuk murid-murid mereka dan peperiksaan dilaksanakan di bawah kawalan guru-guru di sekolah. Dan hari ini kita membuat keputusan bahawa PT3 akan dimasukkan mulai tahun ini.
This comes after the Primary School Achievement Test, or the UPSR, was abolished last year.
Okay, one more topic before we go into the break. We want to talk about the US Border and Customs Protection, or CBP. This is because they have revealed that positive progress has been made with Malaysian companies that are affected by the sanctions that has been imposed by the CBP towards the Malaysian company. 8 withhold release orders were issued against several companies in the country in the last few years, of which 6 are still active. This is due to the various breaches of the ILO, or the International Labour Organization's 11 indicators of forced labour.
We can't report on specific cases due to privacy laws and requirements, but I can say that progress is being made, and there's a lot of encouraging signs within the industries here in Malaysia that have been affected. We understand very, very well the economic impact it has, but again, it's simply a border enforcement issue that if we believe through credible sources that goods may have been made with forced labor, they can't be released into the commerce of the U.S. Until that situation is remediated.
So I interviewed the MPOC CEO, the Malaysian Palm Oil Council, on my show Notepad on Thursday last week. We were talking about a lot of issues. One of them is actually, of course, the ILO and its implication towards palm oil companies in Malaysia. my imploration to you is that go look at the video, watch the interview, try to understand better how it impacts the palm oil industry. Having said that, the CBP ban or sanctions against Malaysian companies is not restricted to just the palm oil industry. It's also towards the rubber industry and a few other industries as well. But to get a good idea of what it is, go to Notepad, go to AstroAwani.com, look for Notepad, look for MPOC. My interview is there. Now, the CBP also clarified its process of clearing certain companies by modifying or revoking the withhold release orders against them. This is going to be done through the collaboration with the independent third-party auditors, as the CBP team is based in the US.
The clearance piece with regards to how we would clear through in order to modify the withhold release order is we would rely upon third-party auditors that are retained by the companies, right? So companies, when they do contact, again, it's a very open dialogue between us and the companies, and they enter into a commitment with which how they'll work through to remediate the indicators of forced labor that have been found. Again, as they go through their remediation process, we ask that they retain third-party independent auditors, and they'll validate that the commitments that they have made have been completed. And so once we validate with those auditors that the commitments have been completed, then we could move forward to modify the WRO.
We'll go for one short break. When we come back, we'll come and watch more of the week ahead. Welcome back. This is the week ahead with me, Ibrahim Sani. The next topic of the day that we need to be looking forward to in the week ahead is, of course, the Cabinet having no objection to the proposed draft of the anti-hopping bill. This is according to the Law Minister or de facto Law Minister, Datuk Sri Wan Junaidi Jaafar. Now, this comes after a meeting last week where the AG Tan Sri Idris Harun presented the bill.
However, the minister in the Prime Minister's Department for Parliament and Law said the Cabinet raised two issues to be refined by the Special Select Committee. The committee is set to deliberate on these issues on June 7th before the bill is finalised. Further details cannot be disclosed to the public as the matter is still under discussion in accordance with the Dewan Rakyat Standing Order 85.
Speaking of anti-hopping, as of now, the MP Datuk Sri Zuraida Kamarudin, Ampang MP, remains in Cabinet as Plantation Industries and Commodities Minister after leaving Bersatu. Prime Minister Datuk Sri Ismail Sabri Yaakob said that her position will be decided after they met soon. Now, what does this mean for Bersatu's influence on the government? Ibrahim Sofyan or Ben Sofyan from Merdeka Centre weighs in.
There has not been an official word whether or not YB Zuraida is going to be retained or dropped from the cabinet. So it's still an ongoing situation. If she is retained, then certainly it does paint the position or influence of Bersatu to be weaker than what it was before. But it also carries a certain amount of risk for the PM in the sense that it will certainly sharpen the relationship between himself and the leaders of Bersatu. It will also mean that the ability for him to count on Bersatu to support him for certain decisions, for certain bills to be put through Parliament in next month parliamentary session will also be called to question. And certainly it may, I think, indicate a worsening of ties as the country heads into a general election.
He added that what is currently happening on the political front will likely intensify, and this would not paint a good picture for the electorate given the current economic condition.
The impact on the electorate is whether or not all of these episodes will intensify politicking, because we are in a situation where we've come out from the pandemic. We are now in midst of some economic challenges, high inflation and prices of consumer goods and staples. So there is some concern there that if the government leaders have disagreements among themselves, and this spills into the open public space, it's going to further dampen public confidence in government's handling of the economy and also policies moving forward. So I think it will rub off negatively on the public space.
So you can watch the whole interview with Ben Sofyan of Merdeka Center on our sister show. Consider this with my colleagues Melissa Idris as well as Syarat Kutan. Having said that, Bersatu's weak position was proven twice in the Melaka and Johor state elections. According to Ben, one way for Bersatu or Perikatan Nasional to stand a chance against BN or Barisan Nasional in G15 is through collaboration with other parties.
It's quite clear that the Malay votes are split three ways, and also the non-Malay votes are a bit depressed in the sense that the turnout rates are very low compared to what we are used to. So all of this points to a situation where unless Bersatu is able to collaborate with other parties in the political arena, it is definitely going to face a challenging task ahead in the election. And the reason is this, because Bersatu sits somewhere in the middle of the political spectrum, along with parties like PKR. So parties on the left and right of the political spectrum, like the DAP and PAS and certain UMNO seats, they're relatively safe because they cater to their own constituents, or cater to the Malay voters or the urban Chinese voter. So for those seats, the support levels are fairly predictable, and therefore they know that there's a minimum that they can attain. But for parties that are contesting in the middle of the political spectrum, where it's a fairly moderate Malay majority or mixed ethnic seats, parties like Bersatu as well as PKR, that's where it's going to make or break them. So if they can find a way to bridge the gap, overcome the baggages that impede the relationship between these two parties, they can do very well. They can repeat the successes of their 2018 outing. But if they're not able to, then it's certainly going to give Barisan Nasional an advantage.
That's enough politics on the show. We'll go for one short break. When we come back, we'll discuss a little bit more on what's coming up in the week ahead. Welcome back. Now, finally, we look at the ability of the government to handle post-pandemic situation and the impact against other geopolitical situations like the Russian-Ukraine conflict, high fuel prices and many others. How all this is going to be navigatable is depending solely on how the Malaysian government manages corruption and leakages. Veteran economist at that, Dr. Nungsari Ahmad opined that there's still plenty of improvement and room to grow when the government tries to work on this issue. He argues that the corruption, leakages and other mismanagement by the government is badly needed to be improved in order for us to handle all the requirements that we've spoken the entire time on this show and many others. Here is Dr. Nungsari speaking about the issue.
Tapi kalau ada rasuah dalam sistem, tak dapatlah 300 bilion tu.
Okey, kutipan tu tak
kurang,
berlangsung.
Kurang. Jadi, patutnya 300, jadi 250. Apakah kesan kekurangan itu? Maka di sebelah perbelanjaan pula kan. Di sebelah perbelanjaan, bila hasil kurang, maka perbelanjaan pun terpaksa dikurangkan. Dan itu kesan daripada ada rasuah di sebelah hasil. Di perbelanjaan pula ada rasuah. Kalau apa kesan rasuah? Satu ialah kalau ada rasuah, dia menjejaskan agihan, DJ. Agihan. Maknanya duit ada sekian banyaknya, yang keperluan untuk dibelanjakan oleh kerajaan macam-macam. Sekolah, jalan, infrastruktur, keselamatan, penguatkuasaan undang-undang sebagainya. Jadi sepatutnya agihan mempunyai kriteria-kriteria dan juga syarat-syarat keutamaan. Yang mana dulu, yang mana kemudian, yang mana diutamakan dahulu, yang ramai diutamakan dahulu, yang sikit diutamakan kemudian, yang memerlukan perlu mendapat lebih pada yang kurang memerlukan dan sebagainya. Jika terdapat rasuah, keutamaan ni semua lari.
I'm going to be honest with you. I don't know whether there's going to be much information coming in from the government when it comes to improving the corruption levels in the week ahead. But it's worth noting to hear what Dr. Nungsari has to say about the issue. Consecutively, the Malaysian Anti-Corruption Commission, MACC, confirms that it is investigating some alleged irregularities linked to the LRT and MRT projects. The Graph agency is looking into few individuals and public listed companies on this matter.
In March, 3 current and 2 former directors of an engineering firm were arrested to assist in a corruption case investigation that is linked to the MRT2 project worth over 650 million ringgit. MACC Chief Commissioner Tan Sri Azam Baki said the agency had started the investigation since March, before a report emerged that French authorities are probing into allegations of fraud and bribery linked to the MRT project. Azam also said the agency is examining a request by French authorities for assistance in the investigation. Meanwhile, MACC has opened 25 investigation papers on mismanagement of COVID-19 relating to procurement, which are alleged to have elements of corruption and malpractice.
Saya cuma nyatakan ia berkaitan dengan perusahaan COVID dan sedang kita siasat. Jadi apa-apa laporan kemudian kita akan maklumkan. Ya?
25 dia dipanggil tak sih?
Jadi kita memanggil dalam 25 kesiasatan ni banyaklah. Sebab setiap satu kes tu berbeza, bukan sama.
Azam, who did not pinpoint any specific party on the matter, also did not rule out roping in former Health Minister Datuk Sri Adam Baba to assist in the investigation as well.
As the company and the tries to impact the recovery of the country, Malaysia Airport Holdings Berhad's growth trajectory, according to the MD, is saying that they are on track. This is largely very important, not just for the company, but for the country as well, because they are at the crossroads of travel and tourism in the country. MAHB's boss, Dato' Iskandar Mizal Mahmud, explained that the company is securing new lines of income and ensuring that the pillars of growth continues to drive profitability further. Now, I had a long chat with Dato' Iskandar Mizal on Agenda AWANI. You can look at that. You just go to astro.com, look for Agenda AWANI, look for MAHB. In my conversation there, we talked about the various business lines of conversation, of new income, of new pillars of growth for the company. But in the meantime, this is what Dato' Iskandar said just last week on this issue.
I will just take you through two things. Number one, you can see from our first quarter results, you see that trajectory is on the right path. Now, moving ahead, you see that we've also just disclosed our passenger numbers moving through. So you see the upwards trajectory. We have also brought down our core costs significantly. So right now, I think we're almost there in terms of breaking through that particular barrier. If you're talking about profitability coming back into break even or making profit. Now, of course, there are a lot of things that needs to still be done.
Those are the kind of items that we need to look ahead for the week ahead. And of course, if you want to reach out to me, just tweet to me at Ibrahim Sani Net directly. We can also reach out to me on Instagram, the same Twitter handle at Ibrahim Sani Net, because I'm going to be looking at every single thing that you send to me and see if we are on track when it comes to bringing the best to you, our viewers. But for now, that's all that we have for this show. Until then, have a good week ahead. My name is Ibrahim Sani. Catch you in the next one.